This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, impeachment hearings begin on Capitol Hill. We get reaction, including news of 9th District Congressman Dan Bishop's decision to allegedly release the name of the whistleblower. Charlotte City Council approves $50 million to study the route of the proposed Silver Line. The Queen City moves to the top of the list of possible Major League Soccer expansion teams. And get ready to say goodbye to your Saturday newspaper. Our roundtable of reporters is ready to detail those and other stories. And seated around this table are David Borax from WFAE News.
Good morning, Mike.
20 Mule Team Borax.
Oh, thanks. I never heard that before.
Nick Oxner is Chief Investigative Reporter for WBTV News. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Oh, you're in good shape. Katie Peralta is Senior Editor at the Charlotte Agenda. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
And Glenn Berkins is founder and publisher of QCityMetro.com. Welcome to you.
Good morning.
If you're listening to us on Monday morning, that's because on Friday we were preempted by coverage of the impeachment hearings in the House. Welcome to all of our live viewers on Facebook Live. We start in Washington.
Committee will come to order.
And with that, a new chapter in American history began to be written for the first time in more than 20 years. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff gavelled in public impeachment hearings. They started on Wednesday with another open session on Friday, followed by closed inquiry on Friday afternoon. And this week being next week for those of you listening live, they will run most of Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Have local newsrooms been monitoring public opinion in Charlotte or around the state to what they've been witnessing?
I was just having a conversation about this yesterday or 2 days ago with my wife about it. It doesn't seem like we're seeing a whole lot of run out and get the local reaction to the impeachment proceedings. And I read an interesting story in the Axios newsletter this morning before coming here about how viewership is kind of down, how these impeachment proceedings are kind of fighting to get an audience.
13 million people watched the first one.
Well, if you compare that to the number of people that tuned in to previous impeachment hearings or even to the Mueller hearings from a couple of years or so ago. So it's not
that doesn't count. That doesn't count internet streaming. That's just on-air television.
It's not to say no one's paying attention, but it feels to me like there's so much other stuff going on right now that it's not getting the top line you might expect it
The
to.
New York Times has an article this morning in the paper that they went around to the swing states, and they got people's reaction in the swing states of all ages and all stripes. North Carolina, of the swing states, had more people saying, of course this is an unscientific survey, had more people saying, well, we're going to wait and see on this and maybe he should be impeached. Everybody else is saying, no, leave him alone. So this could be backfiring. Spectrum News reported that reaction among North Carolina lawmakers, none of whom are on the House Intelligence Committee, fell as expected along party lines. Mark Meadows has long been a critic of the investigation as well as of the Mueller investigation, and he cautioned against the idea of bringing in members of the White House staff. He cautioned against this, bringing in members of the White House staff who have firsthand knowledge of what happened because, quote, it puts a chilling effect on the President of the United States' ability to do his job. But isn't that the main complaint of Republicans on the Intelligence Committee, that all of the stuff being testified to is hearsay, second and third removed from the actual source?
Yes, and without diving into the merits of those arguments, we can just talk about the larger issue that you addressed. It's a pretty good strategy if you're Republicans, right? Do everything you can to try to support the president exerting executive privilege, right? We know there's a lawsuit pending in federal court right now where some former members of the National Security Council are challenging their subpoena and basically asking a judge what has the greater weight, a congressional subpoena or the assertion of executive privilege. So there goes all of your potential or most of your firsthand people who could testify, and that sets up your argument nicely, doesn't it?
What about all these subpoenas? We were told that when impeachment hearings got underway, congressional subpoenas would carry some weight. It's news to me that they didn't carry weight in the first place, but what about them? I mean, they're out there, they're in these hearings. Why aren't these people cooperating or going to jail?
Over a number of presidents in this millennium, we've seen the steady erosion of congressional power and the increasing gain of presidential power. And I think we're seeing the consequence of across all parties controlling Congress and presidents from both parties in the White House. This is not unique to President Trump or President Obama or before that, President George W. Bush. And so what I think we're seeing here is a moment in time where people are starting to realize the effects that we've had of this erosion, slow erosion of power. One of these being that there's increasingly fewer consequences for defying a subpoena.
The other thing that's happening is the Democrats could haul them into court and perhaps get a judgment, but that takes so long, and they're eager to get on with this process.
Why does it take, I don't know much about the judicial system, but why does it take a long time? When there is an urgency to this matter, why wouldn't the courts move more quickly than perhaps they normally would?
That's an excellent question.
This is fast. Courts move very slowly, and so the lawsuit that I mentioned where the NSC officials have asked a judge to figure out what to do had a hearing on Monday while the courts were closed, scheduled on a one small, narrow matter. I think is scheduled for a full hearing in a couple weeks. Now, to us, that's slow. We live in an era where we think everything should be done now. Typically, if you bring an action in court, you're especially in federal court, unless you're in the Eastern District of Virginia, you're not expected to be in court until months and months down the road.
So let's bring this back to North Carolina. On the Monday prior to the start of the hearings, North Carolina Senior Senator Richard Burr was appearing at his alma mater, Wake Forest. He refrained from predicting the outcome of what might happen with this impeachment, but he predicted that any trial in the Senate would last 6 to 8 weeks because the bar for impeachment is extremely high, and the test in the Senate, he said, would have to be, quote, does it reach the level of removal from office?
At the end of the day, will there be more than what the American people know today? I don't know.
So the testimony in the first days of the hearings has already brought new allegations to light, and of course Democrats say that there is clear evidence that the president committed the crime of bribery. That's what they're referring to it now as. Since Republicans do not see or cannot see or will not see this point, can anything sway them?
I would have to say no at this point, and I think going back to what you said earlier about people having kind of tuned out to some degree, and I think that's part of it. I think we all know how this is going to play out. The president, in all likelihood, will be impeached, and in all likelihood, he will be exonerated in the Senate.
And talking about the time frame, your point that it's probably going to be decided along party lines. Senator Rand Paul says, let's just have a vote and get this over with. We know how it's going to go. Let's get it over with. And, I don't think that will happen.
Without hearing the evidence?
Because
he's a juror?
He will be. But there are political reasons why both parties either want it to be longer or shorter. I think, there's actually a divide in the Democratic Party over should we get this over with quickly or should we let it go?
The Washington Post is reporting that Republicans behind the scenes are privately discussing whether to pressure leaders in the Senate to stage a lengthy impeachment trial because that keeps 6 Democratic presidential candidates in Washington at the time of the Iowa caucuses, the New Hampshire primaries, and perhaps longer.
Yeah, I can't imagine
politics.
that. I can't imagine that would be in the interest of either party. Actually, true, the Democrats are facing a presidential primary, but it's election season for all parties, and this is not something I would think the Republican Party would want to drag on well into 2020.
Okay. Republicans have been calling for the whistleblower to come forward and testify, or at least to be revealed. Democrats say that now that everything has been testified to, that he or she reported, there's no reason for the whistleblower to come forward. That person is irrelevant. 9th District Congressman Dan Bishop allegedly named the person that he believes to be the whistleblower in a tweet. He also said that, quote, he refuses to cower before the authoritarian intimidation campaign. What campaign?
Dan Bishop has a history of incendiary rhetoric. Keep in mind, Dan Bishop's the same man who called me a jihadist, the jihadist media, because I did a story he didn't like one time. Just personally offensive to me, for reasons we won't get into. But so here he is, again, with his incendiary tweets and hyped-up rhetoric, and tweeting out a name of someone who may or may not be the whistleblower. We don't know.
Well, this authoritarian intimidation campaign, it's federal law. You cannot reveal the name of a whistleblower. It's against the law. Is that an intimidation campaign?
Well,
this man is a lawmaker.
Under the law, the whistleblower has a right to anonymity. I don't know that it is a crime per se to reveal the name of a whistleblower. But again, we have no independent confirmation of who the whistleblower is or isn't. And if you believe what all of the major news organizations have said, that we're never going to report it.
So, yes, I was going to bring that up next. The New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, even Fox News have not reported the name that he tweeted out. Why not?
I think, apart from the law, it's been a tradition that we protect whistleblowers. The whole idea of a whistleblower is that they come forward with information that we couldn't get otherwise.
That person's name, whether it's really the whistleblower or not, is readily available on Twitter.
Well, as Nick points out, though, there's been no independent confirmation that that's the person.
So, no, and the closest...
But whoa. We print the president's tweets on a regular basis, which are, in many cases, completely unfactual.
But those are newsworthy because it's the president of the United States saying it, and we're tweeting them as the media because it's the statement of a president and deserves coverage.
This is a congressman.
Sure, but why would we tweet something that we know to be speculative and not confirmed?
It's good practice to never report rumor, period. And journalists have gone to prison for not revealing the names of their sources. So anonymity is, by and large, an enormously important thing to protect.
I'm with you, but I think I think we should take another look at reporting the president's tweets then.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, it's a good discussion to have.
I mean, one question that I have is after the next election or when we elect a new president, is that president going to be a tweeter? And will we treat him the same way? Part of me hopes that we don't get a tweeter.
Okay. Tweeter-in-chief. David Colapinto, he's an attorney with the National Whistleblowers Center in Washington, which provides legal assistance to whistleblowers, is skeptical that Dan Bishop actually knows the identity of this whistleblower, and he told WFAE Steve Harrison it just plays into a, quote, deep state conspiracy theory at the urging of the president.
This is a very dangerous process, and it's a game that could be very, very dangerous, ending up in physical harm. It should end immediately.
So given the federal law protecting whistleblowers, if Dan Bishop has truly named that person, what jeopardy might he be in?
I don't believe any. Again, I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't believe that it is criminal to name the whistleblower. But again, we're assuming he actually knows the name, and there's no basis to know or to believe that he actually has the name. He, in a follow-up tweet, when he doubled down on the name of the whistleblower, he said he'd misspelled the last name of the person whose name he tweeted, said that he expected Lindsey Graham to subpoena that person when these proceedings get to the Senate. So, there's no basis in fact for us to believe that he actually knows the name of the whistleblower.
How dangerous is all this? I mean, this is very good for Republicans, but at some point there's going to be a Democratic majority in both houses of Congress and a Democratic president. So how dangerous is this?
I mean, one immediate...
Wipe away all the rules and ignore them. What happens when you're out of power?
One immediate issue that comes to mind is this will make it harder for other whistleblowers to come forward. And do we want that situation? I mean, we have relied and we have Whistleblower Protection Act and all of that because we've decided that it's in the national interest to have people come forward with information. And if somebody thinks they're going to get outed, then they'll stop doing it.
When we come back, we're going to talk about some really local stuff like the Silver Line and funding being approved to study how much that might cost. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup. If you're listening on Monday, don't be surprised. We were preempted on Friday, but we will not be denied our hour on the radio with David Borax from WFAE News, Katie Peralta from the Charlotte Agenda, Nick Oxner from WBTV, and Glenn Berkins from QCityMetro.com. Charlotte City Council waited until after the results of the half-cent sales tax hike referendum before they took a vote on the $50 million needed to study the route of the Silver Line and determine what its cost might be. That line will run, if it's ever built, from Matthews into Gaston County into Belmont. They approved the money to begin work on this 26-mile line. And again, this is to determine what kind of work has to be done to make it work for the railroad and how much it will cost to make it happen. That seems reasonable. Why all the hemming and hawing about whether or not to put this money forth?
Because it's a lot of money. It's $50 million, and they will spend 2 to 3 years doing this study. So that's not even time spent on actual construction.
But it has to be done at some point.
Well,
It does have to be done, but, and remember, the vote was 8-2, so most of the people on the council supported this idea. The two Republicans decided that they were concerned about how we're going to pay for this.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is that there is no money earmarked for this right now. The city and the region will have to go to bat for that money.
So the two Republicans were, of course, Tariq Bakari and Ed Driggs. Driggs was uneasy about spending all that money when the actual construction, as you said, is still up in the air.
$50 million is not exactly sneezing money, okay? I want to make sure that when we commit $50 million, that we're going to get good value and that we're not so distracted by the billions that we plan to spend later that we think, why worry about it? Well, it's only $50 million.
I mean, I see his point, but explain this to me. How can we get good value on a project like this if we don't have any idea of what it's going to cost before we start it?
I don't think you can. To me, it's, and I think I said this on the show once before, it's like paying for the architect to design a building before you actually know what it's going to cost. Right. What it's going to cost is in large part determined by things that will be determined in the study. $50 million, no, that's not sneezing money, but compared to the cost of the project, it's not a lot.
You know, what is it, the rail trail, the green trail, whatever, the Greenway thing, it was, we came up $77 million short.
Yes.
As a surprise, because they didn't do this.
So, Mike, you'll recall that this was on the agenda to be approved, this study, weeks and weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the city council said, we're not going to sign off on this yet because we have real concerns about how the city's managing its capital projects. So this is not in a vacuum. Surprisingly, for any government agency, members of the city council have kind of started to realize and grown frustrated by the fact that the city continues to come up short or need more money or have cost overruns. We've also had the convention center addition that's going on at the convention center at the CRVA that's had budget overages. So members of the council, and I think that contributed in part to why they delayed the vote and why this discussion over the Silver Line's been bigger than I think initially it was going to, and the fact that no one knew how we were going to pay for it. And, look at the shiny quarter-cent sales tax. Should we be trying to get that money?
And Republican Tariq Bakari said it would be a mistake to begin investing in the line without community discussions about how construction might be funded. He also believes that autonomous cars could overtake light rail by the time it's built. And I think the target date for the completion is 2030, and I think that's optimistic. Will autonomous cars be prevalent by
You tell us, Mr. Tesla.
That's right.
From my experience, God help us.
There is I'm going to call it a campaign among certain folks to paint autonomous cars as the future of transportation in the U.S. And this same argument came up 7 years ago when we were looking at maybe putting a red line commuter rail up to Lake Norman. And the opponents of the rail line up there brought in a speaker from a think tank whose whole thing is that autonomous cars are going to be the future. And at that time, he said, in 3 years, we will have packs of autonomous cars driving 100 miles an hour on 77. And it didn't happen. I'm skeptical of that. I understand where it's coming from, but it's also hard for me to imagine that Americans are going to surrender their ability to drive a car.
Well, millennials don't even want a car.
Well, they want transit.
Right.
So,
I mean, we've had several experts on this show talking about autonomous cars, and some of them say, "Yep, it's going to be here by 2025." Others say it's never going to be here, and they all say it's going to start with trucks. So we'll all be taking trucks to work. Councilwoman Dimple Ajmera, a Democrat, made the point that this line is only going to get more expensive the longer we wait.
If we don't invest this money right now, then we might as well say we're not going to invest in our infrastructure, because that's all it comes down to. We cannot delay this.
So council okayed the $50 million. You wanted to say something before I ask the question?
go ahead, ask the question.
The question is, when will we have the study? When will it be done?
It's supposed to take 2 to 3 years to complete. However, there are supposed to be progress reports put out at certain benchmarks when it's 15% completed, and then again when it's 30% completed. So it's not as if they're going to sign this check and just not hear anything from this outside firm for 3 years. They will have a peek into what it's going to look like after a certain amount of time.
And the option to drop out of the study at any point if it looks like it's just not going to work out. But my point that I was going to make is that I think this vote, as expensive as it may seem to some folks, it reflects a will by the council to move forward on its transit plans, including this one. And, if I can go big picture here for just a minute, there are some who argue that we have a north-south line, and it's only fair that we make the next one that we look at an east-west line. I think Braxton Winston and some others have been saying that. And, this is a line that some people will use. It may not be used by those in the suburbs who are not fans of rail, but it will be used by some folks.
And it's not just a matter of fairness, though I do think that's part of it. It's just good policy. We need public transportation. If you drive these interstates around here, you see that they are filling up fast. And unless you want this to become another Washington, D.C., Atlanta, whatever, where you just sit for hours in traffic, we have to have an alternative.
I'm glad you brought up Washington, because Washington has the metro, and it goes well into the suburbs in all directions. And yet, you sit on I-495 going into D.C. in the morning, and you might as well be in the parking lot someplace. And it's been like that since I was a kid driving to work in 1974. It's only gotten worse, but it was bad then. So has the metro helped?
Yeah,
but
the metro's back too.
Imagine how bad it would be if you did not have the metro. Sure, DC, that belt line is a zoo. I drove the belt line for a number of years. But imagine if all those people on that packed metro were suddenly in cars.
Right.
It would be gridlock.
The other thing that's happened in Washington is that the suburbs of Washington have just kept going. So, not unusual for a commute that goes 40 miles or 50 miles. We're not quite there yet, but that's where we're headed.
Yeah, Manassas and Fredericksburg are now suburbs of Washington, D.C., and they're like 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour outside of town.
That sounds familiar.
It does. So that may be moving slowly, our progress toward mass transit. But what's moving at supersonic speed is Charlotte moving to the head of the line to be the next city on the expansion of Major League Soccer.
It's fair to say that Charlotte has done a lot of work to move their bid really to the front of the line.
Yeah, that's Major League Soccer Commissioner Don Garber complimenting Panther owner David Tepper and his team's work on snagging soccer for the Queen City. So, fait accompli? I have people who've told me it's done.
Well, Garber and the MLS have also said that the league is considering not only Charlotte, but Las Vegas and Phoenix, two other cities that have made their own pretty good bids for it. But Tepper's definitely moved himself to the front of the line by doing everything he can to persuade the MLS that we are, to use a word from the development world, we're shovel ready here. He's got a stadium. They want to use that. He's got a lead sponsor lined up in Ally. They want to put their names on the uniforms. He's got partnerships in the works. He's trying to persuade them that he has everything. The one thing he doesn't have yet is a commitment from the city to upgrade the stadium and put money into a training facility, which he will need. And that he is working on as fast as he can, and we're told that the council may vote on that sometime this month.
Yeah, that's $100 million. We'll talk about that in a second. Arthur Blank, the owner of the Atlanta Falcons, paid $70 million for an expansion team for Atlanta. David Tepper is expected to pay between $300 and $325 million. The Atlanta United, that's their soccer team, debuted in 2017. How do you explain the inflation in price in just, 2 years?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think when Charlotte was vying for a team in 2017, when it was Marcus Smith, I think the expansion fee was something like $150 million at that time, and still that seemed exorbitant. It seemed.
Is this because David Tepper is the richest owner in the NFL, and they see a cash cow when one walks in the door?
Sure, they see a cash cow because this guy's a net worth of $12 billion, but at the same time, any team who would come into first place for the 30th expansion team would be paying that $300 million.
What's the 29th paying? Do we know?
200. So it's going to go up just from the 29th to the 30th. But one other point here is that the MLS is looking at what happened in Atlanta, which is just a 3-year-old team. Mm-hmm. They are now, number one, they have the highest average attendance of any of their teams. It's over 50,000. And number two, they're now the most valuable franchise in the league, according to Forbes, which does an annual ranking. It's worth $500 million. And they're looking at Charlotte, and there are many similarities between the soccer community here, the potential fan base for an MLS team, and they're thinking that Charlotte could take off in the same way that Atlanta did.
Don Garber, when he was talking, I guess, to reporters at his State of the League address, which is where this came up, added that David Tepper is very passionate about sport, about Charlotte, and he told the league that they really didn't see what Atlanta would become. And Garber said, that was right, we missed it.
They have for a really long time emphasized that MLS expansion teams need soccer-specific stadiums. And what that means is a stadium custom built for MLS with 20 to 30,000 seats. It feels actually pretty intimate and tight, much different from an NFL stadium. So you look at Atlanta as well as Seattle. That's another team that has its MLS team in an NFL stadium. And these two teams are consistently selling out. They're consistently the most productive in the league in terms of ticket revenue.
Where do they play in Atlanta?
Mercedes-Benz, which is the Falcons.
Is a football stadium.
The Falcons
Correct.
Stadium.
Yeah.
Correct. So
what's that seat? A lot.
Yeah,
Over
70.
50.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there are games where they've sold that out, yeah.
So when we build the new football stadium, will we just keep Bank of America Stadium for soccer? Is that what's going to happen?
Yes.
Okay.
That appears to be
Well,
That's a surprise.
based on the reporting from my colleague David Hodges.
Really?
well, I think the short-term solution would be some improvements to Bank of America Stadium to make it quote-unquote soccer ready.
Well, that's coming anyway. And then they'll ask for money for the new football stadium. And the Business Journal is reporting that in closed sessions, City Council has been deliberating whether to contribute $100 million in tourism tax revenue to help David Tepper pay for soccer-compatible improvements at Bank of America Stadium, as well as an MLS training complex.
How much is that transportation study?
$50 million. So they might vote on this when?
They want to vote on it before the next council is sworn
Why?
in.
It's the same council except for one or two people. Why?
I don't think this
That's
is...
December 2nd.
Yeah, I don't think this is City Council's schedule. I don't think this is David Tepper's schedule. I think this is the MLS's schedule dictating this thing, and they want to figure out the 30th team by the end of the year. So David Tepper is lighting the fire under the seat of City Council to get this done more quickly.
But I think on council you have a recognition that the vote might actually be better and easier with the several new members who might be replacing some soccer skeptic members on the current council. And so there's a real tension here between getting it done on Tepper's and the MLS's timeline and getting it done when you know you will definitely have the votes.
Garber, David Garber Don Garber is the MLS commissioner. He was just talking about expansion in general when he was asked a specific question about Charlotte, which is how Charlotte came up in his conversation. And in that comment, he said, we had done a lot of work to move ourselves to the front of the line. So when is the MLS going to announce the 30th expansion?
There's no hard timetable on this. I think if Tepper gets approval for his money, then we will see an announcement. And as Katie says, they'd like to do it by the end of the year, but there's no hard date.
They are constantly shifting gears, too. I remember they were expected widely to announce the 29th and 30th expansion teams by the end of July when they had their board meeting in Orlando, or when they had the All-Star game in Orlando. I went to that thinking that he was going to announce Charlotte. He didn't. So now we think that it's going to be sometime within the next month or two. It might not be. The MLS loves to be courted. They love to move on their own timeline. They love to make their own rules. It really is a huge question mark, but I think it should be by the end of the year.
And Garber himself has said in the coming months. That's as far as he's gone.
Okay. More than 400 members of the media, among them Nick Oxner from WBTV, were at the Spectrum Center for what was described as a walkthrough for the 2020 Republican National Convention. There were also some politicians there, among them City Councilman Tariq Bakari.
Today, looking around here is the first time to be able to visualize something that we've only talked about quite contentiously for over a year now.
So what did you learn from your walkthrough, Nick?
Actually, the biggest takeaway for me is the fact that they're going to do something that sounds totally crazy in my mind. For the convention, they're going to raise the floor 10 feet. And so the convention floor is going to be 10 feet off of where it would normally be in the Spectrum Center. That's different than what they did when
Does that put it level with the first row of seats?
Well beyond.
Row L.
Yeah, well into the lower level.
Okay.
And so they say that they have a requirement from the party that all of their delegates, voting delegates, be on the floor. They say it's going to improve sight lines, but I can't imagine how much construction that's going to take.
And they're reorienting the convention from what it was like in 2012. Obama spoke on the long end.
Correct.
This is going to be wide as opposed to long.
Yes.
Wide.
And just to give people an idea visually of what's happening, they're raising the level of the floor. Imagine they're filling it up with water up to that 10-foot higher level. They're doing that to expand the square footage of the actual floor so that there's room for everybody. So they need more space than a basketball court.
One thing we learned, because some of our people went to this too, is that during the 2012 Democratic Convention here, the media had places to work and congregate in the concourse where people normally go when they leave the actual arena. And when I covered the Democratic Convention in San Francisco at the Moscone Center, the same was true there. But they're moving the media at this convention to the convention center, right?
No. So the primary workspace, I covered the 2012 as an out-of-towner back then when I was working in Texas, and the primary workspace for the media in 2012 was also at the convention. So that's where your big file rooms are. There's still spaces for the media to work around the arena. Just the bulk of our workspace, as it was in 2012, is going to be at the convention center.
That's far away. What did they talk about? What security would be like around the convention center? Because getting in and out is difficult for people who work downtown or live downtown.
It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. They were very mum on what the actual security perimeter is going to be, but there's been speculation and media reports that the perimeter will be wider than the 2012 DNC. I think that is only kind of natural to expect.
And CMPD is now saying that even though there are no credible reports either at their level or the FBI of any trouble brewing for the Republican National Convention, they will be ready for whatever comes our way. When we come back, more 2020 election news and news about your Saturday newspaper, among other things. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the weekly news roundup coming to you if you're listening on the radio on Monday, because of being preempted by the impeachment hearings on Friday. David Borax is here from WFAE News, Katie Peralta, senior editor at the Charlotte Agenda, Nick Oxner, chief investigative reporter for WBTV News, and Glenn Berkins, founder and publisher of QCityMetro.com. First-term Democrat County Commissioner Susan Hardin, who helped spearhead the effort to get people to vote for the quarter-cent sales tax for arts, a week after its defeat, announced that she will not run for re-election. Are the two connected?
She says they are not connected. She says that losses are part of politics, and this was just a personal decision. She wants to get back to her job as a professor at UNC Charlotte. She claims they're not connected.
So ironically, the person that she defeated to take that seat, Matthew Ridenhour, the Republican, was the spearhead of the anti-sales tax campaign. Will he now run again for his old seat?
He says he's looking at it, so we may see him again.
If you look at the precinct maps on how voters voted for that referendum, you can see that proposal was very unpopular there. So depending on how much of an issue that would become, it might not be a bad idea for her to focus on something else.
Wow.
And just to remind people, that district has leaned Republican in the past. It was a bit of a surprise that a Democrat, Susan Hardin, was able to win that district during that election.
So former South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford announced several months ago that he intended to challenge President Trump in his rebid for the presidency, and now he has decided not to run. Why the change of heart?
Well, he says it's because of the impeachment. He wanted to run emphasizing the federal budget deficit, which he thinks the Republican Party has kind of gotten away from emphasizing and focusing on. He wanted to bring that back into the political debate, but he says the impeachment has sucked all of the air out of the room. And
but all you guys just told me 20 minutes ago that no one cares about the impeachment.
I remember every Trump rally I covered several years ago, one of the top things people brought up to me was the deficit and the loss of manufacturing jobs. Those two things. And I know.
That's what he was talking about.
Well, I'm eager to go to more of these when they start happening with regularly in the Carolinas, because I'm curious to know what people are the most vocal about now, because it seemed as if the deficit was a pretty big deal back then.
And that's not something Trump can run on right now, because the deficit has expanded during his term.
Right. And given the, it was a quixotic venture to begin with, given the difficulty of challenging a sitting president and actually defeating him in a primary, especially when your home state has canceled its Republican primary, as has several other states. So I think he just saw the handwriting on the wall.
The other two Republicans who are running against Donald Trump, however, have stayed in the race, at least to this point. The state's school superintendent has decided to run for lieutenant governor next year instead of seeking re-election. We're talking about Mark Johnson, who, as I recall, has not had an easy time of it in his current position. Is that right, or am I making that up?
Yeah, he's been controversial. He's at odds with both the State Board of Education and the teachers' unions. But he feels he has a solid base of support.
And he enters the lieutenant governor race against a lot of other people, as I understand. How many people are running, and why does anybody want that job?
Good question on why anyone wants that job. I'm not sure what's going to have more, the first North Carolina lieutenant governor debate or the Democratic presidential primary stage. Stay tuned. There's a lot of people.
Okay. I was going to ask about how things were progressing with the redrawing of the congressional maps, but the House is done with it. They've done the work. They voted it out yesterday to the Senate, or yesterday being Thursday. They voted it out to the Senate. They're taking a vote in the Senate on Friday. The makeup is what? 8 GOP districts to 5 Democratic districts. That's how it is now.
That's what we're looking at right now.
So now they're seeing what? Well, I'm sorry.
We're going from 10 Republican and 3 Democrats to what looks
5.
like 8 to 5.
And Democrats would like a 6-7 or a 7-6 or a 6-6-1 map.
That's right. And so, the Republicans are saying that Democrats won't be happy with anything. But, this does change the picture, not necessarily in all parts of the state. It's going to affect, so remember here, we're going from 10 Republicans to 8 Republicans possibly. That means 2 Republicans are going to lose their seats. They could lose their seats in new districts that are more favorable to Democrats. Those would be Walker in Greensboro and George Holding in Raleigh. And those 2 districts previously were more suburban districts and more rural districts, and now they're going to include the cities. And so that will give Democrats a better chance to win those, and it looks like, those 2 guys will be out of their seats.
Do the courts have to get involved in the final decision?
So the courts will look at this and decide if it can go forward. And the reason that they're doing it right now is that the case has not gone all the way through the court. The court just said it would be advantageous for you guys to redraw these,
Right.
Because we think that an ultimate ruling would be against the old districts.
While you're still talking, David, I-77 Mobility Partners is paying NCDOT late fees of $30,000 a day on the toll lane construction on I-77. And so far, the fines amount to $6.4 million, but they've only paid about half of that.
Actually, those fines pertain to other problems during the contract. So other things like destroying, running into signs and knocking them down, causing traffic jams, other kinds of things. And what the DOT is saying is that under the contract, they are allowed to forgive some of those fines if they decide that it warrants that. I don't think we know yet how much they have paid so far. I mean, we could do the math, and I haven't done it, $30,000 a day since November 1st. But, the question is, why haven't they been paying that up to this point, and what will happen with these other fines, and we don't know yet.
So we have 3 former Observer employees seated around this table, David Borax and Katie Peralta and Glenn Birkins, and we've been hearing rumblings about this and prognostications about this for years, and this week it became a reality. McClatchy Newspapers, which owns the Charlotte Observer, the Raleigh News and Observer, the Rock Hill Herald, the State and Columbia, and others, announced the end of Saturday printed newspapers in some of those markets. Does this affect the Observer, or is the question, when will this affect the Observer?
I think the question is more when. We know that it's going to happen at some point next year. They've not announced the date when the Observer will stop publishing on Saturday. But at some point it will happen with all the McClatchy papers.
And here is what McClatchy is saying about this.
We are seeing wide acceptance of digital Saturdays among our subscribers in the markets where the change has been implemented or announced. And in those markets where implementation has occurred, we're seeing an accelerated conversion to our digital product.
That's Craig Foreman. He's McClatchy's CEO. Digital Saturdays are already in operation at the Durham Herald-Sun and Myrtle Beach's Sun News. Did he just say that in those markets where they have cut the Saturday newspaper, that they're seeing an accelerated conversion to the digital product? Could that be because they're forcing that conversion?
Yes.
That's the idea here.
It's doublespeak.
I think it...
Is that what they really want? That's what they really want. They want out of the print business, don't they?
Correct. And they have hit the fast forward button on this quote-unquote digital transformation in recent years at the expense of the print product, of course. And it's interesting that they kind of chip away at the print product. It's sort of like a death by 1,000 cuts instead of just ripping the Band-Aid right off.
1,000 paper cuts.
Yes, exactly. I think that, to me, the interesting thing is that they still do make money off print advertising, and it's more of a lucrative product than digital ads. And I think that one thing that any of us who have mentioned to people that we work at the Charlotte Observer, the first thing out of longtime subscribers' mouths is, I keep getting charged more and I'm not aware of the rising costs of print, yada, yada. I think that there's been sort of, the transformation has come at the expense of the print subscribers who pay the most.
That's right.
And a lot of the time these are older people. My great aunt, for instance, is in her 90s and she's completely deaf and she doesn't use the computer, and her newspaper is the outlet to the world for her.
Plus, Saturday's the only day you can really sit there and read the newspaper.
Right. If you work full time, when else?
That's right. That's it.
So there's.
I know I'm old. So what's going to happen to the Saturday comics?
I'm a millennial, and I've always thought that still treating your print subscribers well, or at least explaining what is going on, is a valuable thing. It's good way to do business.
We're talking about the decline of newspapers in general, and that certainly is part of this. But a reminder here, this is also a business decision that's driven by previous bad business decisions. This, I think, originated when McClatchy bought the Knight Ridder chain for $4.5 billion some years ago, and they've been having trouble. They've got big debt. And this quarter, they've lost $300-something million. And the biggest issue right at this moment is that they can't make their required contribution to the pension plan. And for any of my former Observer colleagues who still are counting on a pension there, it's not going to be there. Glenn is raising his hand here.
Very quiet about all
and
this.
And it's possible that the McClatchy, the old Knight Ridder pension, will be taken over by the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, by the federal government.
Glenn?
I hope we're a long way from that.
So is this the shape of things to come? Is this just the
Yes.
Saturday first, then maybe Monday, then maybe Wednesday goes away?
This is definitely the shape of things to come. This isn't a McClatchy thing. This isn't a Carolinas thing. This is a national thing. We're seeing it all over the country. Newspapers are cutting back on their Saturday or eliminating their Saturday papers.
Well, I know that the McClatchy Company is a different company from the people who publish the New York Times, but I have a word of advice for McClatchy. If you're going to cut the newspaper out, get a better website and get a better app, because both of them suck.
Well, again, it goes back to the whole fast forward on the digital transformation. They've also revamped their advertising departments, I believe, across the country. I think one thing that can be said about newer tech companies or newer, media startups is they value the user
No,
experience.
but the New York Times website and app is excellent.
Sure.
It's excellent.
Absolutely.
So just buy it from them. I mean, you literally buy the electronic part of it.
Well, that's the other problem is McClatchy is not, they're seriously liquid challenged, I think was the word that Craig Foreman used. They don't have the money to go on.
Meanwhile, and we wish them the best of the Observer, because we have to have good newspapers.
I agree.
In a democracy. We must have them, and they have to be healthy, and hopefully they can make themselves healthy by doing what they're trying to do here. Meanwhile, your publication, The Charlotte Agenda, is asking people to become members. Now, wait a minute. Don't be stealing our model here. Waiting for you to talk.
Membership is something that we've been planning for a while now. Ever since I started, this was always part of the plan. We wanted to diversify our revenue streams by asking people to become members, asking people to invest in high-quality, long-form journalism. We're not going to change the lifestyle content that we have done for years and that we are known for, but we're just adding on to that. And with the addition of other, kind of traditional journalists like myself and Michael Graff, we hope to continue to improve the quality of our overall coverage.
Just want to say, your founder, Ted Williams, writes, "We're not copying another model here. We're building a modern media organization for Charlotte. Membership is about supporting the work, not getting a tote bag." You're walking into dangerous territory here.
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but that membership model was stolen a long time ago. Membership revenue from memberships now account for one of the fastest growing sectors in the media industry, especially online. Q City Metro has a membership program. Just about every local media outlet here now has a membership program.
So a little peek behind the curtain of local journalism here. There was a story on the news at 6 o'clock yesterday on WBTV that almost didn't make the air because a restraining order was placed on airing the story by Judge Lisa Bell, which was then overturned by Judge Lisa Bell. What's the story behind this? It was from an investigative reporting department, right?
Yes, my colleague David Hodges had a story that ended up airing about a tow truck company that towed and later sold the vehicle of a woman who was deployed to the border as part of the National Guard. The tow truck company got Judge Bell, Lisa Bell, to sign a restraining order late Wednesday night. In the United States, we do not have prior restraint on a free press.
Why did she admitted that she was wrong. Why did she make that ruling in the first place?
She said that the lawyer for the tow truck company presented her a motion that claimed our story was going to be incorrect and that the company, as a result, had already started receiving threats of violence unspecified. Mm-hmm. She later admitted that she was incorrect which is good of her to do that. Lisa Bell's a good and serious judge, but I was still surprised that she signed this in the first place because it's a fundamental tenet of our country and our democracy and of journalism and the First Amendment that we do not restrain the free press in this country.
Okay. Charlotte, as we all know, is underparked. As far as Uptown goes, we have 4 small parks in each of the 4 wards. Now a 220-acre version of New York Central Park is being proposed. Katie, where and by whom?
There is a new nonprofit called Friends of Queens Park, and it is a group of architects, developers, and attorneys who want to turn the 220-acre rail yard in North End into this massive park filled with greenways and gardens.
This is just north of the Brookshire Freeway.
Yes, so if you're standing, if anyone's familiar with NODA, if you're standing on the Matheson Bridge looking toward Uptown, it's a beautiful view of the skyline with a very industrial-looking.
So there's a rail yard there now. It is not uncommon, I'm told, to have rail yards converted into parks.
Cities do it all the time. Sacramento's doing it right now. Greensboro just bought back some rail yard from
So
Norfolk
we have
Southern.
20 seconds. We have to get the permission of the railroads to do this. Is that going to happen, you think?
Norfolk Southern is historically very difficult to work with, but it has been done.
Where would the money come from?
That is TBD. That's always the fun
always
part,
the
isn't
sticky
it?
wicket. Well, we'll just add that to the $100 million and the $50 million. We'll find what's going to happen. David Borax from WFAE News, Katie Peralta from the Charlotte Agenda, Nick Oxner from WBTV News, and Glenn Berkins from QCityMetro.com. Thank you all for the hour.